A very good day to you and welcome to a brand new program called Elections Watch Zimbabwe, proudly brought to you by the Civio Institute. Elections Watch is all about tracking all discussions and issues to do with elections and electoral laws. Today, we're going to be talking about the significance of the 2023 elections in Zimbabwe. Elections provide the citizens with a managed way to voice their opinions and choose who and what is best for themselves and their nation. And of course, to join us for this discussion, I have two experts in the studio who will be taking us through why the 2023 elections play such a critical role. I have with me Ms. Judith Kaulem, who is a seasoned development and social policy analyst who has more than 15 years of experience in her capacity as Executive Director of the Poverty Reduction Forum Trust. Judith has worked extensively in the area of poverty, gender, and human development research. To also join me for this discussion, I have with me Francis Mukora, who is with the Community Alliance for the Human Settlements of Zimbabwe, and he's a journalist, a public policy analyst, an advocate and social entrepreneur, youth mentor, and food security activist. How are you today, Judith and Francis? Thank you for joining me on the Elections Watch.
Hi, Unique. Thank you for having us.
Fantastic. So I'll start off with Francis, talking about the significance of this election for the main contenders and their respective political parties. Why do we see such an importance and significance?
Let me start with the question first to say how or to what extent are the elections important for the major political parties? And apparently, in terms of the major political parties, obviously we are talking of the ruling ZANU-PF party, the main opposition, the Citizen Coalition for Change, and also probably the MDCT led by Senator Douglas Monzora. So, well, I would say for them, maybe for ZANU-PF, it's about power retention, to try and retain their majority in parliament as well as the presidents and try to continue the trajectory that they have taken from 2018, the vision 2030 that they have put across. But for the opposition political parties, practically the Citizens Coalition for Change, I think it's about trying to claim a stake to win the presidency and also the parliamentary majority. But if they can't do that, at least to have a significant representation in each or all arms of the government so that they can also push the economic and the political reforms that they've been talking about, I think since formation technically, maybe about 5 years ago. Then for the MDCT, I'm not really sure, probably to continue on where they've been, but also maybe their goal being the opposition is also to try and see if they can win the presidency and the parliamentary majority. Then most importantly, for the citizens, I think it's for them to try and see if they can, like you've said, select a government of their choice, make sure that whatever their choices and their aspirations are reflected in the outcome of the election, and for them to ensure that whoever they choose as the citizens of Zimbabwe, not necessarily as the voters, but as the citizens of Zimbabwe, whoever they choose then goes around to put across a legislative and a policy framework that then addresses the issues that they are so keen to see being addressed, the bread and butter issues specifically speaking.
Thanks so much, Francis, for that. And of course, you're definitely right. I mean, it is both important for the political parties and the citizens at hand. Judith, what key issues, when we look at the 2023 elections, are at stake?
Thank you very much, Unique. I like where Francis left off about talking about bread and butter issues.
Yes.
So really, for me, elections is about the citizens, it's about the people. And what is it about the people? It's about people's welfare at the end of the day. Whichever way it goes, whichever part is ruling, it's about ensuring the welfare of the citizens. And this 2023 election is coming at a time, Unique, when the poverty levels are high. More than 80% of people in Zimbabwe live below $5 per day. And we know the cost of living. It is coming at a time where the prices of basic commodities is shot again by over 85% around that. And this is against a background of high unemployment, especially among the youths, who should be the backbone of the economy. Yeah. This is also coming against a background of an unstable currency, which has continued to lose its value. Estimations are that between January and June this year, the local currency has lost more than 80% of its value. So really, those issues are critical as we enter into the elections. Business, which should be able to absorb the youth that we are talking about in terms of unemployment, are struggling with power cuts, so they cannot be productive. Yeah. So that's a critical issue. And we also know that elections have always been characterized with violence, lack of security. So it is important, it is a critical issue as we enter into these elections to ensure that there is safety and security for the citizens, because otherwise failure to ensure that, it might have implications even on the voter turnouts. When people are not sure of their safety, they would rather stay home. Yeah. So I think the issue of safety and security is also quite key. So in essence, unique, because I'm passionate about the issues of poverty reduction, the issues of equality. So we need to, the elections are coming in at a time where they have to demonstrate how poverty is going to be reduced, how the inequality gaps that we see are going to be reduced, among other issues, as we go into the elections here.
I think that's quite interesting. Thanks so much, Judith. I think the statistics obviously play an important role in terms of us understanding our context and where we are in Zimbabwe, Francis. Judith mentions that, you know, most Zimbabweans are living below $5 per day, which is a serious cause for concern. So when we look at the link between the elections and the economy, maybe you want to take us through that a little bit, Francis. How important are these elections to the economy when we see such high unemployment rates, when we see that, you know, a lot of people are living in poverty right now in Zimbabwe?
Yeah, they always say, I'm not really an economist, but they always say the economy follows the politics. So apparently, clearly, and I think this is something that we've experienced even here in Zimbabwe, that, well, at least some of us growing up from around 2000, that the outcome of the election always have a bearing on the performance of the economy over the next 5 years after a specific election. So yeah, the elections are really, really important, especially the credibility of the outcome of the election is really, really important for in terms of how the economy is going to perform going forward. First and foremost, we talk about the confidence of the investor, local and international investors in the environment in which they are going to put their money. They need to see stability, political stability, before they can be able to make a decision on whether to put their money in the country or not. Stability of the economy or of the politics also then determines which kind of investors are going to come in the country. To what extent are they going to be investing? What even the amount of the money, the foreign direct investment that is going to come in the country? I believe that it's got a huge bearing. It's determined also by the level of stability of the political economy in the country. So if the economy, the politics are well, and the outcome of the election is credible and acceptable to all and sundry, and believable even to the outside, we, I believe, are also going to be keeping a keen eye on what is going to be happening in the country. Then I think it's the first and most fundamental step that can then determine where we go with the economy for the next 5 years, or probably even beyond.
Judith, just before we get into our short break, let's talk a little bit about, you know, we've had elections before, and obviously there's a serious challenge here. As Francis said, that the economy usually follows where the politics is at the end of the day. What are some of the key challenges? How is it that, you know, we're still having elections and nothing seems to be changing? We still see a lot of Zimbabweans in poverty, living below the $5 mark that you're talking about. What are the challenges there?
I think the challenge is unique about committing the political willingness to move from the promises to realization of the issues that would have been promised, because you find that on paper all is beautiful. People are promised heaven on earth, if I may put it that way. But then in terms of the realization, but part of what we have been grappling with in Zimbabwe at the moment is the issue of development, which in my view is not inclusive, which does not take everybody on board, where we continue to see corruption diverting resources that should be able to deal and address the needs of the marginalized people. So we perpetually see groups of people that are marginalized, and these include the women, these include the youth that we are talking about, these include people with disabilities. So those are the challenges that we continue to see. So it's really failure to then walk the talk when people are campaigning and are making promises, and then at the end of the day, we are not putting people at the center of what we should be delivering. And talking about, at the moment, how there is a dissonance between what has been promised and what is on the ground, I would want to highlight, Unique, maybe 2 issues. We have had election period where the promises that we are talking about have been made. But I want to speak to 2 issues really that are a bother, not just to me, but I think the nation at large. The country is now grappling with the issue of drug and substance abuse. And for me, it's an indicator of despair among the youths, of disappointment, where their dreams have not been realized. The dreams of a better life has not been realized. So if the economy was working well and taking everybody on board, and I think this is a ticking bomb, because when we have the majority of our graduates from universities now entering into drug and substance abuse, that's not sustainable. That's not going to lead us anywhere. And I want to point to the other challenge as well, which we see as a demonstration of failure to meet the promises. We have seen a huge surge of Zimbabweans leaving the country, going anywhere else except Zimbabwe, because there is hope and promise for a better future. And for me, that's a serious kind of regression in terms of where we want to go as a country. So those are some of the kind of issues that I think are emanating from promises that remain on paper and then not realized in real life. And also, I think there's the issue of high polarization, in my view. Polarization which has had the impact of pursuing individual interest at the expense of the common good. Polarization that has also led even to politicizing professional institutions that should be able to deliver for people. Here I can speak of academic institutions. I can speak of churches. So when we politicize everything and are not necessarily looking at inclusive development, I think for me, that's a challenge.
It is indeed a serious challenge. And of course, after the short break, we'll continue this conversation as we've given a context and background of why the 2023 play an important role. But who are the elections for anyway? Who is supposed to serve who at the end of the day? We'll be right back after the short break. Welcome back to the Elections Watch Zimbabwe program, proudly brought to you by Civio Institute. Today, we, of course, are introducing a brand new program where we'll be tracking all discussions and issues to do with electoral law and elections. And, of course, our first discussion is focusing on why the 2023 Zimbabwe elections play such an important role in your life and in my life. And, of course, to join me for this panel, I have with me Judith Kaulem and Francis Mkora. Judith is from the Poverty Reduction Forum Trust, and Francis is the programs manager at the Community Alliance for Human Settlements. And just before the break, we were giving you a context of why these elections play such an important role. But right now, we want to get into and follow through with what Judith was talking about in terms of the challenges. We did say that elections at the end of the day are about a specific government serving the people, and we've been seeing recurring challenges, a sort of a vicious cycle at the end of the day. Francis, what are your thoughts around this vicious cycle that seems not to address the real issues on the ground where citizens are supposed to be served by a specific government?
I think Judith has already alluded to that when she spoke about the mismatch between citizen expectations, promises made prior to elections, and the extent to which the promises are delivered upon. And just so that I don't seem like I'm speaking out of the blue, I think there have been credible institutions that have been tracking the extent to which government has been, the rulings and PF party to be specific, after winning the 2018 elections, they've been fulfilling the promises that they made prior to the 2018 elections. So I'll start with my organization. As Community Alliance for Human Settlements in Zimbabwe, prior to the 2018 elections, we went across the country in communities that we work with and sort out their views and aspirations on which issues did they want whichever political party would win the election to address. So we came up with what we call a 10-point charter of issues that highlighted what issues the citizens from the community that we work with wanted addressed. Issues to do with security of tenure, issues to do with the provision of basic services, issues to do with the regularization of informal settlements, because the majority of the communities that we work with are informal settlements within urban and peri-urban areas. But there are also issues to do with the improvement of the economy. And then after, I think, halfway through, during the tenure of this current lifespan of this current government, I think organizations such as Civio Institute actually put up, I think it should be the Zim Citizen Watch, to track the extent to which the rulings and PF party, after winning the election, had fulfilled by way of coming up with policies, but also by actual implementation of the promises. I'm not really sure about the specific percentages, but what I know for a fact is, which is also validated by the views and concerns of the citizens across the country, is that the extent of delivery fell far short of the expectations existing by 2018. So that on its own comes to what Judith has already said, to say there is a gap, a huge gap, which is why probably we find a lot of disgruntlement in terms of how the economy is performing, what is going to happen post the 2023 election. Of course, we've got probably Vision 2030, National Development Strategy 1, but the issue now, even going forward, which I still believe is still relevant, is that to what extent are we then going to be seeing the promises made in 2018 and even the ones that are going to be made now going to be fulfilled going forward.
And of course, you can track the Zim Citizens Watch on the Civio Institute website, where we have specific manifestos that have been put by the different political parties and how far they've actually been able to come. It's important that as citizens, we understand where we are and where we're going. Judith, you wanted to add on?
Yes, I actually want to add on, as you talk about why we continue to see this vicious cycle of maybe non-performance. And part of me is thinking it has to do with us as citizens and our attitude. I think Zimbabweans have mastered this art of having plan B. You know, when things don't work, when there's no power, I buy my generator and I'm good to go. When there's no water, I drill a borehole and I'm good to go, right? So I think there's been complacence in terms of then pushing for some of those commitments to be realized. And so we continue to see the widening gap between those that have and those that do not have. We continue to see the rural-urban divide in terms of inequalities. Monique, we are in 2023, but we still have children that have to walk more than 5 kilometers to go to a school. We have pregnant women who have to walk maybe the same distance or more than 5 kilometers to go to the nearest health clinic. And I think we have tended to, it's okay to celebrate small wins, but I think we have tended to be very minimalistic, where we celebrate one classroom block in some rural place somewhere as a huge achievement, where we celebrate maybe 200 meters of tarred road, where the rest of the road is impassable. So I think we have really become too minimalistic, and also our attitude in terms of not wanting to push as much as we should. I'm not advocating for any violence, but I'm advocating for asserting our rights and claiming those rights as Zimbabweans. I have a right to access safe drinking water. I have a right to access health and education. I shouldn't be falling back on Plan B as a citizen, because the government has a responsibility and duty to ensure that I have those services.
You know, I think that's quite interesting, Judith, that you say, and you're not the first person to mention that Zimbabweans have become so good at making a plan B, which is sad because we are not addressing the problem. The problem will always be there. But Francis, why do you think Zimbabweans are making a plan B? Because, I mean, if we're allowed to hold our leaders to account, do we know our rights? Do we know the Constitution? Do we know the policies? Why are we making a plan B instead of addressing the situation on the ground?
For me, I think it basically comes down to two issues. First and foremost, for me, it's a sign of, should I say, despair or maybe loss of hope altogether that the solutions are supposed to be coming from the government that would have given the responsibility, the mandate to provide our solutions. So it's like, okay, it's fine. Judith is supposed to provide me with probably bus fare or lunch money. But I know that Judith is not going to do that. So what do? I look around, scavenge around, try to see if I can get maputo or something to eat, because I know for a fact that in as much as it is Judith's responsibility, she probably has proven beyond reasonable doubt on several occasions that she is incapable of doing that.
But is it incapability, or I'm scared to speak to Judith about
the
transport money?
Not really. I think it's a combination of both. Because, well, if Judith has demonstrated time and again that she is incapable of or unwilling to do that,
but
or
Judith
maybe
might be driving a GD6, but is failing to give me transport money,
which is again an issue of attitude, because Judith's priorities, I'm basically not part of Judith's priorities. So that brings us to the issues of duties and responsibilities for us as citizens. We as citizens of Zimbabwe have got the right that we are given by the Constitution of Zimbabwe, the one that we adopted 10 years ago. It gives us a lot of rights, sacrosanct, as they say in law, that we have got to access. But it also gives us the responsibilities that we have. We've got the rights provided for by the Constitution, but we also have got responsibilities as citizens of Zimbabwe, one of which responsibility is to hold the duty bearers to account. So we should constantly be knocking, no matter how irritating it may be to the policymakers, the duty bearers, as long as we are the ones who elected them, who gave them that mandate, which is what you was saying. It's our responsibility to keep knocking onto that, and also to take initiatives that ensures that we then get what we want. And maybe 2 or 3 years ago, my organization, we did a policy dialogue where we brought the major political parties, like it was ZANU-PF, it was the CCC, it was the MDCT. We brought them together to discuss the extent to which they had delivered on the promise that they had made prior to the 2018 election. Because these are the 3 political parties that are in government. ZANU-PF in the executive, in parliament, and the MDCT in parliament, the CCC also in parliament. which brings me to the issue of attitude, because there was a lot of finger pointing, blame shifting, but that is not what citizens expect when they elect whichever political party in whatever position of authority, be it at local authority level, parliamentary level, or even at presidential level.
Judith?
Yeah, maybe if I may just come in. Earlier on, we talked about the issue of safety and security as being a key issue as we move in to the elections. And I think experience is the best teacher.
Yeah.
So one asks and says, for this kind of action that I want to take, what has happened? What happened to the other person who took the same route in the last time? So that can have implications in terms of how then one behaves. But I think it then calls for the reform of our law enforcement systems to ensure that they are people-centered. They put the rights of people at the center, ensure that people are protected. But otherwise, I think sometimes lack of inaction is fear of either the unknown of what you what you already know because it has happened to somebody before. So that could be as an impediment in terms of maybe people pushing in. And also when we have said, if you have been asking for the same thing over and over again, either you go into your plan B mode. There's just this apathy that nothing is going to change, which is probably what we will see in terms of even voter turnout. When somebody is not convinced that things are going to change, they're like, why waste my time? Which I think probably is a wrong attitude because you still need to exercise. You still need to exercise your right. But at the end of the day, that has implications for how people push and demand for their rights to be realized. Yeah.
Thanks, Judith. Francis, let's talk about re-engagement and their link to these elections. How will these elections affect the country's efforts at re-engagement? Obviously, talking at international level, but also at local level, because there are lots of conversations that have sort of been swept under the carpet, and there's serious engagements that need to take place.
Yeah, I think it's really a very, very, I should say maybe an opportunity to try and speed up the process of re-engagement, both at the domestic level, that is the state apparatus, the government and the citizens, but also more importantly, at the international level, because that is where I think the focus of the government, the current government, is at, to try and re-engage with the international community. But you would notice that I think Zimbabwe has been under sanctions or restrictions, depending on how you want to call them, for closer to actually more than 2 decades now. And one of the issues that have been derailing the efforts for engagement have been the outcome of the elections, the violence that we all know have characterized the past elections, the lack of credibility in some of the elections. So, and even in the 2018 elections, I think there were a lot of reports. The EU Observer Mission actually had a report which also raised some issues. I think the Commonwealth also had a report on the elections, and virtually almost every other international observer who observed the 2018 elections had a number of issues that they thought could have been improved upon to improve the credibility of the 2018 elections. So as long as those issues are not addressed going into the 2018 elections, before, that is the period between now and 23 August, during the actual election date and even after the election, if those elections, if credibility is not seen to be part of the election process, pre and post, then I think it's going to have negative implications on the process of re-engagement. So it's in the best interest of all of us as Zimbabweans, but most importantly, the major players, the political players, the government, the state institutions, and even the contestants, to ensure that the election, the 23 election, has got credibility in terms of free and fairness, absence of violence, and also even the credibility of issues such as the access to the voters' roll. These are issues that have been spoken about time and again. So if those issues are addressed, then we may have, and we hope we're going to have, an election that is credible, that we can then build upon to start escalating the processes of re-engagement.
Well, after the short break, our last segment, do join us as we're going to be talking about how elections might deal with the issues of poverty and state building. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Elections Watch Zimbabwe program, proudly brought to you by the Civio Institute, as we're going to be discussing issues to do with elections, electoral laws, and so much more, especially you, for the citizens out there who are watching us wherever you are in the world. Just before the break, we were obviously talking about, the issues to do with who serves who when it comes to who is being voted for within the government, the specific manifestos that we have from the ruling party ZANU-PF for what has been achieved and what hasn't been achieved. And right now we want to take a deep dive into addressing issues to do with poverty and state building and their link to elections. Welcome back, Judith and Francis.
Thank you.
So starting off with Judith, let's talk a little bit about your passion, which is obviously poverty reduction, which is very important for Zimbabweans to stay in the country and for them not to even dwell or delve into drug abuse or substance abuse. Are political parties raising issues to do with poverty? And, what is your confidence that there is alignment between what the parties promise and eventually deliver? I know you had touched on it, but let's, I think, unpack it a little bit.
I think Unique will agree that on paper, the political parties, they say all the right things.
Yeah.
They say all the right things, but what we have seen in the experience of living with post-elections is that gradually things are dropped off.
Yeah.
Gradually interest shifts. Gradually only a few people then begin to benefit. So really we have seen good promises on paper, but it has not been commensurate with the results on the ground. Like we have discussed already, that we continue to see a widening gap between those that do have and those that do not have, which means that we haven't seen development that is inclusive. There's this mantra, and the president is passionate about it, leave no one and no place behind.
Yeah.
When you hear that, and then when you juxtapose that with the reality on the ground, you find, no, they don't speak to each other, because so many people are left behind in terms of access to basic services. Remember, we are saying elections at the end of the day are about meeting the basic needs of the citizens.
Yeah.
But the scenario on the ground is not speaking to that. So really, I think political parties are saying all the right things, but are not delivering on those things. For me, I think that's the long and short of it. Yeah, the delivery is still way below the expectations of the people. Yeah.
Thanks, Judith, for that. And looking at post-election, what are some of the scenarios that we could possibly be looking at, Francis, and linking them with their implications, of course, especially when it comes to state building? Can we say that as we look beyond the elections, there could be some sort of state building that we haven't seen before? Or do we see, the country moving on, as usual?
Yeah, I think, again, it depends on the outcome of the election. And for me, there are probably two a little bit more realistic outcomes of the election.
Yeah.
It's likely that ZANU-PF is going to win and continue being the government as it is now.
Why do you say so?
No, I'm not saying they're going to win. I'm only saying
it's likely.
No, not that it's likely, but these are a little bit more the more realistic options. That is either the ZANU-PF or the CCC or probably the MDC team. I can't see any other political party outside of these three, or probably even outside of these two, winning the election to come up with to form the next government for Zimbabwe. So if ZANU-PF wins, it's most likely that they are going to continue on the same trajectory that we are on.
Right.
Because they already have got Vision 2030, they already have got National Development Strategy 1, which is supposed to end in 2025 and then be succeeded by National Development Strategy 2, which is going to last from 2026 to 2030. So in light of that, that is why I'm saying that if ZANU-PF wins, we are most likely to continue on the same trajectory, the Vision 2030 that I've been speaking about. But if the any other opposition party wins, the CCC or the MDCT wins, it's highly likely that we are going to see a shift in terms of the trajectory of the political and the economic reforms. So yeah, those are the two realistic outcomes of the election for me, yeah.
Okay.
Then to add on to what Judith said, to say how are we likely to see things progressing going forward, I think it also depends on the attitude. But for me, what is more important is to a change in attitude whereby we should start seeing whoever wins the next election using scientific evidence to determine the priorities, the development priorities of the nation. Because we've heard, for instance, we've heard so much about the roads being developed, which is a good thing. We've also seen the airport being developed, which is a good thing. But then the question is, to what extent does that resonate with the priorities of the citizens? Yeah. Because for the citizens, I think it's about issues of bread and butter issues, issues to do with being able to send my kids to school, being able to get good health care. Those are the priority issues. And without taking away from what is already being achieved, what I think is that whoever wins the next election and forms the next government should listen to the outcomes, the views of the citizen to be able to determine which issues should be prioritized. And that's not too difficult because, like I said again, I think issues that organizations such as Civil Institute have come up with a list of priority issues based on scientific research. And we are talking of credible research institutions that have got international credibility. And if we can make use of that evidence, then I think it takes us in the right direction in terms of delivering and meeting the expectations of the citizens. Okay. But most importantly, lastly, it also depends on the outcome of the election. To what extent is the outcome of the election credible? That is a key and very fundamental issue that everything else can then build upon.
So priority is obviously key at the end of the day. Judith, talking about, the bread and butter issues that Francis is talking about, when we look at poverty reduction and, if you could sort of have a magnifying glass that goes beyond the elections, post-elections, what are the possible scenarios that you're looking at when you look at poverty reduction, and what are their implications?
I think for me, we have already talked about the vicious cycle that is happening. But I think given that we have also agreed that on paper, the political parties, those that are vying for positions, they know exactly what needs to be done. If they were to live up to what they are saying, we would be home and dry. Right. So I'm glad that political parties like ZANU-PF, they already this narrative of leaving no one and no place behind. They already have, the current government already has the narrative of Nika inova kwa neve nevayo, which means it's more inward looking and looking at its citizens. So I think what is then required is the political willingness to actually actualize that. Because they already know, there won't be an aha moment for them because they already know. And if it is maybe one of the opposition parties that comes into power, because they have already lived the hardships and seen what needs to be corrected, it is my hope that they will also live up to that. But the challenge is sometimes when you get into that chair, I don't know what happens, and then people somehow forget what they meant all along and what they sought to achieve. So I think for me, it's about political willingness to actually realize and deliver for the people. We speak of Zimbabwe and we know that Zimbabwe is endowed with natural resources.
Yeah.
Yes, we have talked about engagement and re-engagement, and we can't run away from that because we live in a globalized world where we need to be interconnected. But if we take the current government's position that it means we have to leverage on our natural resources for the common good, for the benefit of everybody. All we need is political willingness to tame corruption, which in my view is what has diverted a lot of the resources that should have benefited the ordinary citizens just into the pockets and comfort of a few. So we need a political willingness to tame that. Failure to do that will leave us in this same state where we are seeing challenges like we have already alluded to, of our educated youths being decimated by frustration and going into drug and substance abuse. We will continue to see our investments going into West. Yes, Zimbabwe is lauded as a country with the highest literacy rate, and true to that. We have an increase even in our institutions of higher learning. So we do have graduates, and as a nation, investment has been made into all those different graduates. But if we are not going to ensure that the economy is comfortable enough for these people, then we continue to invest for the benefit of other nations as our citizens leave the country. We know the government is, I'm sure they realize that, because recently I think they put in measures to stop nurses from going.
Yeah.
Because we have our health institutions empty, yet we are increasingly year in and year out churning out trained health personnel, but then they go. So I think failure to then live up to the promises will continue to see us having not to benefit from the investments that we have made. So I think really there's need to be a match between promise and delivery.
Yes, the promise and delivery is key. And of course, as Francis said, priorities are key at the end of the day. If you'd like to understand a little bit more about the Citizens Watch app, you can go on the Civio website to understand a little bit more about manifestos and how far, our political ruling party has actually gone in fulfilling these specific promises. Francis, what are your last words?
My last words would be to say, I'm going to vote. I hope all of us are going to vote. And I also hope that what we vote for is what we wish. And what we wish is going to materialize after elections, regardless of whoever win the elections. Yeah. And that as citizens, after we have elected a government, we should then take the extra step of taking government responsibility for them to be able to deliver on the promises that they would have made, because it is in our best interest, and they would have made those promises, and it is in the best interest of us as Zimbabweans and the nation at large to see that whatever good promises that are made between now and 2023 elections are fulfilled in the next 5 years, so that we can have the Zimbabwe that all of us want.
Thank you very much. And of course, that was Francis Mukora, who's the programs manager at the Community Alliance for Community Settlements. And we had Miss Judith Kaolem, who is the executive director at the Poverty Reduction Forum Trust, as they joined us on our very first episode of the Elections Watch Zimbabwe, proudly brought to you by the Civio Institute. And on this program, we were talking about the significance of the 2023 elections. And of course, their hope is at the end of the day that, citizens' voices are heard more and that promises are actually fulfilled at the end of the day. Thank you to everyone who joined us. And of course, join us next time for another interesting conversation on the Elections Watch Zimbabwe. We'll see you next time.
Hello, friends from Zimbabwe and in Zimbabwe. My name is Tendai Morisa. I'm with Civil Institute. We are literally 30 days away from our harmonized elections. It's going to be an interesting election campaign season, and I'm here to introduce our new project, Elections Watch Zimbabwe. It's a platform for us to track all the issues, the discussions, and violations to do with electoral laws. But our appeal in this project and in this moment is for us to freely campaign, hold our ideas to ourselves, and also find ways of talking about public problems in a civil manner. But we are introducing a concept where we are tracking how those who want to be elected into office are actually prepared, are actually preparing manifestos, and how those align with citizen aspirations. So related to that, I'm introducing a new dialogue series that is going to be a 6-part series that is running from now until the day of elections, where we are talking about the significance of elections for citizens in Zimbabwe. This dialogue series is unique in the sense that we are not bringing in those who are trying to get into public office, but we are bringing in public commentators to talk about the public problems that we face and how political parties can align with the issues that are raised through various studies, various consultations that we have done. And also we're going to be discussing about how to hold our peace, how to discuss public problems in a civil manner, and also what to expect, the different scenarios that we have post-elections and what that would mean for Zimbabwe. So to all those of our colleagues and friends who are in political parties, we wishing you well. We wish that you campaign well, freely, and also we hoping for the best for your political party and for yourselves, for those who are aspiring to be ward councillors, members of parliament, those who want to be in Senate. We wish you well. We are hoping that you'll use this moment to express the kind of agendas that you have when you get into office. We hope that these elections will not be about personalities, but they'll be issues driven. We'll be tracking all your activities on our new platform called Elections Watch Zim. Thank you very much.